The dust swirled around Sergeant Eleanor Vance's worn combat boots as she surveyed the bustling airfield. The roar of engines, the shouts of mechanics, and the metallic clang of tools were the soundtrack to her life. Pearl Harbor had changed everything. Overnight, the quiet rhythms of her small Iowa town, Harmony Creek, had been shattered by the urgent drumbeat of war. Eleanor, a woman forged in the stubborn practicality of the Midwest, had answered the call without hesitation. She was good at her job. Exceptionally good. As a lead aircraft mechanic, her hands knew the intricate dance of engine components, the precise torque needed for a propeller, the subtle hum of a perfectly tuned machine. She could diagnose a problem faster than most men twice her rank, and her dedication was unwavering. But in the year 1942, talent wasn't always enough. Especially for a woman in a man's world. Her particular cross to bear was Captain Sterling, a man whose polished uniform seemed to reflect not competence, but a deep-seated insecurity. He was a desk jockey, promoted more for his connections than his capabilities, and he resented Eleanor's natural authority and skill. To him, she was an anomaly, an inconvenient truth in his neatly ordered world where women belonged in kitchens, not cockpits or under airplane fuselages. Vance, Sterling's voice, always a little too loud, cut through the din. He strode towards her, his expression a familiar sneer. Still tinkering with that bird? I thought I told you to focus on the new P-40s. We've got a schedule to keep, not a tea party to host. Eleanor straightened up, wiping grease from her brow with the back of her hand. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, met his unflinchingly. Captain, the P-38 needs a full engine check. A minor vibration could become a major disaster in the air. We lost 5 planes last week to preventable mechanical failures, Sterling scoffed. Minor vibration? Vance, you worry too much. These are American planes, not some rickety contraptions. We're building 50,000 of them, aren't we? A few bumps and rattles are to be expected. He gestured vaguely towards the distant hangars, a dismissive wave of his hand. Besides, what would a woman know about combat readiness? Your job is to follow orders, not question them. The sting of his words was a familiar ache, but Eleanor had learned to channel it. It fueled her, hardening her resolve. She thought of her younger brother, Billy, a fresh-faced pilot in training, full of dreams and an almost childlike trust in the machines he would fly. His safety, and the safety of countless others, depended on her meticulous attention to detail. With respect, Captain, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of suppressed anger. My job is to ensure these planes fly true and bring our boys home. And right now, this P-38 needs my attention. Sterling's face reddened. Your attention? You think your attention is more important than my direct order? Let me tell you something, Vance. Hermann Göring himself, Hitler's right-hand man, laughed when he heard America's goal of 50,000 planes. He called it a pipe dream, a boast from a nation of shopkeepers. And frankly, with mechanics like you slowing things down, I'm starting to think he might be right. The words hung in the air, heavy with insult. Göring's mockery was a bitter pill for every American, a challenge to their very spirit. To have it thrown in her face by her own superior was a profound injustice. It wasn't just an attack on her. It was an attack on every person working tirelessly on that base, on the very idea of American strength and resolve. Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She looked past Sterling towards the endless rows of hangars, the skeletal frames of new planes slowly taking shape. 50,000 planes. It was an audacious goal, a testament to American industrial might. But it was more than just numbers. It was a promise to fight, to defend, to win, and she, Eleanor Vance, was a part of that promise. Captain, she said, her voice now dangerously low, you can mock me, you can mock our planes, and you can even mock our goal. But I promise you this, those planes will be built and they will fly. And I will make sure every single one that passes through my hands is a flying fortress, not a coffin. Sterling merely sneered again, turning on his heel. Just make sure you finish that P-40 by sundown, Vance, or you'll be spending your nights polishing boots. Eleanor watched him go, her jaw tight. The injustice of it all burned. But beneath the anger, a spark of fierce determination ignited. They mocked America, and they mocked her. but they didn't know the heart of a nation or the unwavering spirit of a woman like Eleanor Vance. She turned back to the P-38, her hands already reaching for her tools. There was work to do, and she would do it with a silent, unwavering vow, not just to build planes, but to prove them all wrong. The rumble of the engines now sounded less like noise and more like a symphony of defiance. Days blurred into weeks, each one a relentless cycle of grease, oil, and the constant thrum of machinery. Eleanor worked with a focused intensity, pushing herself harder than ever. Captain Sterling's insults, Göring's sneering challenge, they became fuel for her resolve. She was driven by a quiet fury, a deep-seated need to prove not just her own worth, but the capabilities of every woman who dared to step outside society's prescribed roles. The air base, officially named Freedom Field, was a microcosm of America at war. Men from every corner of the country and a growing number of women toiled side by side. Eleanor found solace in the camaraderie of her fellow mechanics, especially a gruff but kind-hearted older man named Gus. Gus had been fixing engines since before Eleanor was born, and he saw her talent, not her gender. "Don't let that puffed-up peacock get to you." "Ellie," Gus would say, his voice a low rumble as they worked under the belly of a B-17. He couldn't tell a carburetor from a coffee pot. "You, on the other hand, you got the touch. The planes listen to you." Eleanor would offer a rare, tired smile. "Just trying to make sure they come back, Gus." Her biggest project, the P-40 fighter, was a demanding beast. It required meticulous care, and Sterling, to add to Eleanor's burden, assigned her the most troublesome aircraft often those others had given up on. He hoped she would fail, giving him an excuse to reassign her to clerical duties, a fate she dreaded more than anything. One particularly sweltering afternoon, a P-40, nicknamed the Desert Hawk, was wheeled into her bay. Its engine was spitting, sputtering, and reportedly losing power mid-flight. The pilot, a young man named Lieutenant Miller, had narrowly avoided a crash landing. Sterling arrived, predictably, to gloat. "Well, Vance, looks like you've got your work cut out for you. This one's a real lemon. Perhaps a woman's delicate touch isn't quite suited for such a stubborn machine." Eleanor ignored him, her focus entirely on the P-40. Its damaged cowling, the streaks of oil on its fuselage, they spoke to her. She began her inspection, her fingers tracing every rivet, every seam, her ears attuned to every cough and wheeze of the engine. She worked through the night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer will. Gus stayed with her for a while, offering silent support, occasionally handing her a wrench or a fresh rag. As dawn approached a breakthrough, deep within the engine, hidden beneath layers of grime and other mechanics' hurried attempts, she found it, a hairline fracture in a critical fuel line, almost invisible to the naked eye. It was a flaw that could have led to catastrophic engine failure at altitude. Eleanor meticulously repaired it, her hands moving with precision and certainty. She replaced the faulty part, retested the engine, and then, only then, did she allow herself a moment of exhausted satisfaction. The Desert Hawk, once a crippled bird, now purred with a healthy, powerful growl. Later that morning, Lieutenant Miller arrived looking anxious. He'd heard whispers about the P-40, about its persistent problems. He saw Eleanor covered in grease but standing tall beside his plane. "Sergeant Vance," he began, "I heard about the issues with my bird. Is she flight-worthy?" Eleanor wiped her hands on a rag, looking him directly in the eye. "Lieutenant, the Desert Hawk is more than flight-worthy. She's stronger than ever. I found a hairline fracture in the fuel line. It's fixed. She won't let you down." Miller's face, etched with worry, slowly broke into a grin. "A hairline fracture? No one else could find it. You saved my life, Sergeant. Thank you." Sterling, who had been hovering nearby, heard the exchange. His face was a mask of disbelief, then a flicker of something akin to fear. Eleanor had not only fixed the plane, she had exposed the inadequacy of the previous inspections. "Nonsense, Miller," Sterling interjected, trying to regain control. Sergeant Vance simply followed protocol. Any competent mechanic would have found it eventually. Miller, however, wasn't fooled. Captain, with all due respect, I've had 5 mechanics look at this P-40. Sergeant Vance found the problem when no one else could. She's the best. The words were a small victory, a crack in Sterling's armor. But Eleanor knew it was just one battle in a much larger war. The larger war wasn't just against the Axis powers. It was against the prejudice and limitations placed upon women like her. She thought of Göring's sneer, America's audacious goal. They needed every plane and every skilled hand to achieve it. And she would ensure that her hands, calloused and strong, contributed to that monumental effort. As the Desert Hawk taxied down the runway, its engine a powerful roar, Eleanor watched it go, a quiet sense of purpose settling in her heart. News traveled fast on Freedom Field, especially when it involved a pilot's life being saved. Lieutenant Miller's story of Eleanor Vance's miraculous fix on the Desert Hawk spread like wildfire among the flight crews. Pilots, often a skeptical bunch, began to seek her out, requesting her specifically for their pre-flight checks or nagging engine issues. Her reputation solidified, not as that female mechanic, but as Vance, the one who knows engines better than anyone. This burgeoning respect among the airmen only deepened Captain Sterling's resentment. He saw Eleanor's growing influence as a direct challenge to his authority. He couldn't openly punish her for doing her job well, but he could make her life miserable. He buried her under paperwork, assigned her the dirtiest, most thankless tasks, and constantly found fault where there was none. Vance, this wrench isn't properly aligned in your toolbox. Is this how you maintain discipline? He'd bellow, holding up a perfectly ordinary wrench. Or, I've noticed a smudge on the tail fin of that B-24 you just cleared. Unacceptable, Sergeant. Our boys deserve perfection. Eleanor endured it all with a stoic silence, her gaze unwavering. She knew his game. He wanted her to break, to quit, to admit that a woman's place wasn't on the grease-stained airfield. But she was forged of sterner stuff. She thought of Harmony Creek, of her grandmother's quiet strength tending to their farm through droughts and blizzards. Eleanor had inherited that grit. Meanwhile, the war effort intensified. Factories across America churned out planes at an astonishing rate. The initial goal of 50,000 aircraft, once scoffed at by Göring, was not only being met, but surpassed. The numbers were staggering, a testament to the industrial might and collective will of a nation united. Eleanor saw the tangible proof every day, new fuselages arriving, wings being attached, engines roaring to life for the first time. Each plane was a promise, a symbol of hope. One day, a new directive came down from command. A critical convoy of bombers was being assembled for a crucial mission, a long-range strike deep into enemy territory. The stakes were incredibly high. Every plane had to be in peak condition. The lead mechanic for the mission's flagship bomber, a B-17 known as the Iron Lady, was a coveted and vital role. Eleanor, despite her stellar reputation among the pilots, assumed Sterling would choose one of his favored male mechanics. To her surprise, Sterling called her into his office. "Vance," he began, his voice surprisingly devoid of its usual bluster. "A critical mission is approaching. We need the best. The Iron Lady needs a complete overhaul, every nut and bolt checked." He paused, looking out his window at the distant runways. I've been instructed to assign you to it." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, a tiny spark of triumph in her chest. She knew instructed meant someone higher up. Likely one of the grateful pilots or a senior officer who had seen her work. Had overridden Sterling. "Yes, Captain," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. Sterling turned back to her, his expression a mixture of grudging respect and barely concealed fury. "Don't think this changes anything, Vance. This is a one-time assignment. And if anything at all goes wrong with that bomber, it'll be on your head. You understand?" "Perfectly, Captain," Eleanor said, a quiet fire in her eyes. Nothing will go wrong. The next few days were a whirlwind. Eleanor dedicated herself entirely to the Iron Lady. She worked with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession, checking every system, every wire, every hydraulic line. She slept on a cot near the hangar, eating cold rations, her hands a blur of motion. She found small imperfections, tiny vulnerabilities that others might have missed, and corrected them with expert precision. Gus helped, offering quiet assistance and sharing in the long hours. As the day of the mission approached, the Iron Lady stood gleaming, a testament to Eleanor's unwavering dedication. Its engines hummed with a powerful, confident rhythm. Lieutenant Miller, now promoted to captain and part of the mission, sought her out. "Eleanor," he said, using her first name for the first time, his voice warm with respect. "She looks magnificent." "Thank you." "We're all counting on you." Eleanor simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the bomber. "She'll bring you home, Captain." But as the bombers prepared for takeoff, Sterling appeared, his face grim. "Vance, a final check of the auxiliary fuel pump on the Iron Lady. Command wants absolute certainty. Do it now." His tone implied a hidden doubt, a last-ditch effort to find fault. Eleanor felt a surge of exhaustion and frustration. She had checked that pump 3 times already, but an order was an order. She climbed back into the bomber, her tools clanging softly, and began the inspection, her heart heavy with the weight of responsibility and the unspoken challenge from Sterling. Eleanor rechecked the auxiliary fuel pump, her movements efficient and practiced despite her profound fatigue. She knew it was fine. She had personally overseen its installation and run diagnostics on it just hours before. This was Sterling's last attempt to find a flaw to justify his long-held prejudice. She found nothing, of course, because there was nothing to find. "All clear, Captain," she reported, her voice flat. Sterling grunted, a sound of grudging acceptance, and finally, mercifully, left her alone. The roar of the engines as the Iron Lady and her accompanying fleet took off was deafening. A symphony of power and purpose. Eleanor stood on the edge of the tarmac, watching them disappear into the early morning sky, a knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. She hadn't just worked on these planes. She had poured her heart and soul into them. Each one carried precious lives and the hopes of a nation. The hours that followed were agonizing. The airbase was eerily quiet without the constant drone of planes. Eleanor, unable to rest, walked the hangars, her mind replaying every detail of her work on the Iron Lady. Had she missed anything? A loose wire? A faulty gauge? The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, a burden only those who held lives in their hands could truly understand. Late that night, the first reports started trickling in. The mission had been a success. Relief washed over Eleanor, a wave so powerful it almost buckled her knees. But then came the details. Enemy resistance had been fierce. Several planes had sustained heavy damage. And one, the Iron Lady, had been hit repeatedly, taking a direct hit to one of its main engines. A cold dread gripped Eleanor. She had envisioned every possible scenario, every worst case. An engine hit. A direct hit. She had meticulously serviced those engines. Would her work hold up under such brutal conditions? Hours stretched into what felt like an eternity. Finally, the first crippled bombers began to return, limping home, riddled with bullet holes, their crews exhausted but alive. Eleanor scanned the sky, her heart pounding. Where was the Iron Lady? Then a distant drone. Faint at first, then growing louder, more distinct. A collective gasp went through the ground crew as a B-17, its left engine a smoking ruin, appeared on the horizon. It was the Iron Lady. It was flying, against all odds, on 3 engines, slowly but surely making its way back to Freedom Field. Eleanor felt a sob catch in her throat. A mixture of profound relief and overwhelming pride. She had known her work was good, but to see it tested in such a crucible and to see it hold, it was everything. As the Iron Lady made a rough but successful landing, Eleanor rushed towards it, pushing past the crowd of onlookers. Captain Miller emerged from the cockpit, his face smudged with soot, but a triumphant grin on his face. He spotted Eleanor and immediately headed towards her. "Sergeant Vance!" he shouted over the cheers and the wail of sirens. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes alight with a gratitude that went beyond words. "You did it! That engine, it took a direct hit. It should have torn the wing off! But your repairs, your reinforcement, they held. We would have been lost without you." Eleanor, usually reserved, felt tears sting her eyes. "I just did my job, Captain." "No," Miller insisted, shaking his head. "You did more than your job. You built a fortress. That's why we call her the Iron Lady, and that's why we're all here today. Göring laughed at 50,000 planes. But it's not just the number, is it? It's the quality. The sheer uncompromising quality, made by people like you. He paused, then added in a lower voice, "You saved our lives, Eleanor." Just then, Captain Sterling pushed his way through the crowd, his face a complex mixture of shock and disbelief. He had expected the Iron Lady to be a casualty, a validation of his low opinion of Eleanor. Instead, he found a triumphant crew and a bomber that had defied destruction. He looked at the smoking engine, then at Eleanor, then back at Miller. The evidence was irrefutable. His face slowly drained of color. The sneer was gone, replaced by a look of profound, dawning understanding. He had been wrong. Terribly, utterly wrong. The crowd of mechanics and airmen witnessing this moment began to cheer again. But this time, many were looking at Eleanor, their faces reflecting admiration and respect. It wasn't just Miller's words. It was the tangible proof, the physical manifestation of her skill and dedication that had brought them home. Eleanor stood there, grease on her face, her uniform smudged, but with a quiet dignity that radiated strength. She had faced injustice, endured mockery, and overcome prejudice. And in the face of impossible odds, she had proven her worth, not just to herself, but to everyone who had doubted her, and doubted America's ability to achieve the impossible. The Iron Lady, battered but victorious, was her testament, a symbol of redemption and respect earned. The aftermath of the Iron Lady's return was a turning point for Eleanor. The story of her meticulous work and how it had saved Captain Miller's crew spread throughout Freedom Field and even beyond. She was no longer just a skilled mechanic. She was a hero. Pilots specifically requested her for their most critical inspections, and even the sternest senior officers nodded in respectful acknowledgement as she passed. Captain Sterling, however, became a ghost. The incident had publicly exposed his incompetence and, more damningly, his prejudice. His authority, once wielded like a blunt instrument, evaporated. The respect he had demanded was now freely given to Eleanor, while he found himself isolated and ignored. He was eventually transferred to a remote, obscure administrative post, far from the roar of engines and the reality of the war effort. Justice, in its own quiet way, had been served. The war continued relentlessly, but America's industrial might truly shocked the world. Göring's sneer faded into history as the United States didn't just meet its goal of 50,000 planes. It doubled it, producing over 100,000 aircraft by the war's end. Each one a testament to the factory workers, the engineers and the mechanics like Eleanor Vance, who had poured their sweat and skill into every rivet and every engine. Eleanor remained at Freedom Field, her dedication unwavering. She trained new recruits, sharing her expertise with both men and women, ensuring that the next generation of mechanics understood the profound responsibility they held. Her former quiet dignity transformed into a quiet but undeniable leadership. She earned promotions, not because of connections, but because of her unmatched skill and leadership. Sergeant Eleanor Vance became Chief Master Sergeant Vance, a figure revered by all who served alongside her. Years passed. The war ended and the world slowly healed. Freedom Field transitioned from a wartime base to a peaceful commercial airport. Eleanor, having served her country with distinction, eventually retired and returned to Harmony Creek, Iowa. The small town had changed too, touched by the war, but its essence remained. She settled into a quiet life, a small cottage on the outskirts of town. She never spoke much of her wartime experiences, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. But every now and then, a local boy or girl, hearing whispers of her past, would ask about the war. One crisp autumn afternoon, a young newspaper reporter, a bright-eyed woman fresh out of college, sought Eleanor out. She was doing a story on local unsung heroes of World War II. She found Eleanor in her garden, tending to her prize-winning roses, her hands still strong and capable despite the passage of time. "Chief Master Sergeant Vance," the young woman began respectfully, "I've heard incredible stories about your service during the war, especially with the Iron Lady. Eleanor smiled, a faint, nostalgic glint in her eyes. "Just doing my job, dear." The reporter pressed on. "They say you saved that crew, that your work was unparalleled. And that Captain Sterling? He was very critical of you at first, wasn't he? Because you were a woman?" Eleanor paused, snipping a dead rose head. "Some people," she said, her voice soft but firm, "have trouble seeing beyond what they expect to see. They judge a book by its cover, or a mechanic by her gender." She looked directly at the young reporter, her eyes holding decades of wisdom and quiet strength. "But you know, dear, in the end, truth has a way of revealing itself. Quality speaks for itself whether it's an engine or a person." The reporter listened, captivated. "And America's goal of 50,000 planes, mocked by Göring. You must have felt incredible pride when we built 100,000. Eleanor's smile widened, a deep, satisfied expression. "Pride doesn't quite cover it. It was vindication, not just for me, but for every man and woman who believed in what we could do, who put their hands to work and refused to be underestimated. We showed the world that when America sets its mind to something, and when its people are united, there's no limit to what we can achieve." She then pointed to a faded, framed photograph on her mantelpiece, a picture of the Iron Lady in flight. 3 engines roaring, 1 smoking, but still soaring. Beside it, a much smaller, slightly crinkled photo of her brother Billy, smiling brightly in his pilot's uniform. "Every plane," Eleanor said, her voice filled with a quiet power, "is a promise that we will fight, that we will protect, and that we will bring our boys and girls home." And every single one of those 100,000 planes, and every person who built them, proved Göring and anyone like him utterly, completely wrong. The young reporter realized then that Eleanor's story wasn't just about a brave soldier or a skilled mechanic. It was about the spirit of America, the quiet power of determination, and the ultimate triumph of unwavering belief over cynical doubt. It was a story of respect earned, not through words, but through the undeniable, tangible truth of her work. And that, Eleanor knew, was the most satisfying twist of all.